Skyrim's combat is boring. Elden Ring and Witcher 3 are fun, but there's one fundamental aspect to RPG combat that no game these days gets right, and if you value role-playing in your role-playing game, the closest thing you have came out more than 20 years ago. So in this video, I'm going to attempt to solve the RPG combat problem in my game, Robin Hood Shadow of Nottingham, which you can wishlist on Steam. So what exactly am I talking about? What is the problem with RPG combat? Well, if you're a fan of action RPGs like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, nothing. Those are great games, and if RPGs were only about combat, there would be no problem. But they're not. In the traditional sense, an RPG allows you to play as any kind of character, specializing in one particular skill set, and if you ignore the character's skills in favor of pure action gameplay, the player base looking for immersive character builds get the short end of the stick. Skyrim was supposed to allow that, but we all know that in Skyrim your barbarian and your mage are both excellent stealth archers. Your character's skills mean very little. Even in a game that actually has fun combat like Dark Souls, you as the player carry the burden of skill, meaning all your characters will be as good as you. There's definitely room to debate here. Sure, you get more stamina or do more damage as you level up, but personally in an RPG, I want my character's skills to change the nature of gameplay so that every playstyle is totally different. And so I set out to see if I could make a game that would do just that, but still offer a fun action combat experience. Now, it's very possible that I won't be able to figure this out, and if I don't, I still want the combat to at least feel fun. That way, in the worst case scenario, we'll at least end up with decent action combat, and if I really have to, I'll just take the easy way out and have your skills just increase your damage like Skyrim. So how do you make combat feel fun? Well, it hinges around two key principles, and if I can't nail them, I'll end up with a lot of bad reviews. First of all, in bad combat systems, players tend to feel like they have to do the same thing over and over again, and it gets really stale. To avoid this, players need to have moment-to-moment choices that will impact the state of their fight. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here, just keeping it simple with a normal attack, strong attack, and timed block. You also need to consider how these actions affect your stamina. The real challenge will come with the second principle. One of the biggest reasons people hate Skyrim's combat is that it feels like you're swinging your weapon underwater. Compare this to Dishonored, where you can see that your attacks feel much more impactful. How do we achieve this? Every animation for an action, like swinging your sword, has three parts: the wind-up, the impact, and the recovery. Skyrim's impacts are really slow, so for my first set of animations, I had no wind-up because I wanted to make them feel fast. But this just made my swings feel weightless. I'm looking for a sweet spot where the wind-up is fast but perceivable, and the impact is really fast, and the recovery is a bit slower. If you're making a game, be careful, because any events you have on an animation just won't fire if your transition starts too early. It took me a while to figure out the transition duration for each strike, but if you manage to time it right, it feels very smooth. The enemy animations will be more difficult because you see their whole bodies. Up until now, I've been using free placeholder animations, but they just won't cut it. So now I need to make new ones, but since I actually want to get this done and test it out, I won't spend too much time on them for now. I'll just create some temporary keyframe animations that I can polish later. For now, I need to start focusing on implementing the gameplay. But to do that, I'll still need to solve the biggest question of all. How do we take this action combat system and account for the character's skill? I believe that the answer lies in a game that's over 20 years old. Before Skyrim and before Oblivion, there was the greatest game ever made: Morrowind. Most people don't see combat as Morrowind's strong suit, but it did simulate your character having a high or low skill using a percentage hit chance. But we can't use that. Players hate hitting an enemy and being told they missed. But what if there was a way to do hit chance while still making it feel fair? This is the most complicated part of this whole plan. I thought about it for days, and I thought I came up with a good solution, but little did I know, this was just the beginning. The fundamental design goal is that combat at lower levels should be tangibly different from combat at higher levels. Morrowind does this, but one of its main problems is a lack of communication to the player. The enemy doesn't look like he's dodging or blocking. Instead, I thought, what if player skill doesn't necessarily affect your hit chance, but actually it affects the enemy's behavior? So if you have a much higher skill level than the enemy will block much less frequently. But we can take this even further. What if the player's skill level determines whether or not the enemy will take advantage of your openings? Like if the player just stopped blocking or initiated a strong attack that gives the enemy a chance to hit him. I implemented a system when I started this project that I think will hold the key to this problem now. This event handler started out as a way to organize code, but it also allows me to easily trigger a reaction from the enemy when I take an action as a player, or vice versa. But what about the chance calculation? This is tricky because it's more subjective. How often should an enemy block if he's the same level as you? Or if he's much weaker or much stronger, or only a bit weaker or stronger? To solve this, let's start by determining the maximum range of the difference between your skill and the enemy's skill. Since the minimum skill level is 1 and the maximum is 100, the range is -99 to 99. If your skills are equal, the chance to block should be 50%, I think. and it should reduce down towards 1% the weaker the enemy is than the player, and up to 99% the stronger he is. I found a formula for linear conversions that gives me the final percentage, and I can just create a random number between 1 and 100 on the handler, and that will determine whether the enemy is successful. I'll give myself and the enemy a skill of 50%, so I hit about 50% of the time. If mine is 100 and his is 1, I'm usually hitting, and for the opposite, he is almost always blocking. The in-between values feel pretty good as well, and you can also see that the enemy is taking advantage of the opportunities that I give him by unblocking or starting a strong attack. But there's still one major problem. The animations still suck, and the enemy is so static and it's really easy to just spam attacks. He doesn't stand a chance. I have to admit, there's a lot that I took for granted about Skyrim's combat. It's not easy to come up with a good system. But to be fair, I don't have the time and money that a AAA studio does. And at this point, it started to feel like maybe I overestimated what I could do. Maybe making an RPG is a bit too ambitious. But I didn't want to let that stop me, and I knew I had to live up to the claim that I really can solve this combat problem. So, reluctantly, I hopped back into Blender to overhaul the animations once again. I think the biggest reason people struggle with animation is because they don't realize that it comes with the same exact challenges that trying to draw from your imagination does. Try drawing a face from memory, it won't turn out very well unless you're incredibly talented. Usually people use reference images. Same goes for animations. I literally recorded myself doing the stuff that I then animated the enemy doing. It looks silly, but honestly it makes the whole process much easier and much faster. The animations made a huge difference, but I also made the enemy move around much more dynamically and added particle effects for blocking and blood splatters, and finally I felt like my idea was starting to come together. As is, the build is available on my Patreon, so please support the development of the game by subscribing on Patreon. You can see what it's like to attack enemies of different skill levels. I'd love to know what you think. Does this system really work? I'll also be making a lot of updates to the builds. The animations still need work, but if you can't support on Patreon, no worries, I understand, but please at least wishlist the game on Steam if you think it's worth making. It helps immensely. Thanks so much for watching, subscribe for more devlogs, and God bless.